Clan technologies would open a wide array of roles never thought imaginable by Innersphere mechs of various sizes. One need only look at battlemechs like the Executioner, a 95-ton assault mech reaching speeds of over 100 km per hour in one of its configurations, to understand the broad range of power and abilities brought to life by lighter, more efficient engines, weaponry, and internal components. But it's not just the gigantic who have become more agile with this sophisticated level of technology. What if the small became mighty? Mightier than many mechs which were tens of tons heavier. In the running for being one of the most heavily gunned light mechs ever constructed, in this video, we are going to examine one of the most dangerous snakes to slither out of Clan Staradder. The appropriately named Adder. A light mech weighing in at 35 tons, the Adder represents a major shift in priorities as far as mech construction is concerned, at least amongst the clans. While many Innersphere battlemechs of the same weight may attempt to become light hunters themselves, none can truly match the raw firepower and versatility that this snake-related battlemech represents. Named Puma by the defenders of the Innersphere, denoting its speed and power, this lion of a light mech is a truly terrifying combatant to face down. But where does its story start? Many clan omnimechs were over a century old, some being almost 2 centuries old by the time of the clan invasion, like the Summoner. But this does not reflect the Adder's story. In fact, the Adder's tale represented a radical rethinking of clan warfare as a whole, one which was not truly embraced by the initial invading clans. With the information gathered from the Dragoon Compromise in its early years, Clan Staradder looked upon their ancestral home, the Innersphere, in horror, as they realized that clan doctrine would be, at best, successful for only a brief window of time in this combat environment, and any invasion built on clan warfare was doomed to fail. They would make enormous adjustments internally almost immediately. An entire second-line galaxy, their Kappa galaxy, was used to try to emulate Innersphere warfare, and they were utilized to try to have other clan galaxies train against them. The Staradders knew that Zelbringen had no value to the warriors of the Innersphere, and if they could harness not only vicious defensive tactics, but the population of the Innersphere as a whole, to either be conscripted into combat, or to produce war materials for conflict, the clans, even with their advanced technologies, would be absolutely finished. As a part of this initiative, however, a new battlemech would be commissioned by the snake-like clan. The Adder was built in 3010, from lessons learned from the barbarians they would hope to face soon enough. Sent, of course, by the Wolf's Dragoons. It was built from the very start to be an optimal anti-spheroid battlemech. The mech displayed such levels of raw firepower and general battlefield competency that it could rip through older mechs of the same weight, but also provide devastating levels of support fire downrange, even breaking the backs of mediums and heavies. If there was a pocket battleship in battlemech form, the Puma represented this. While Clan Staradder would never receive the opportunity to invade the Innersphere itself due to internal clan politics, its legacy would be felt most prominently with the devilish design they built for the invasion. But this is hardly the end of the Adder's story. As one would assume, it was manufactured by the Staradders in the clan homeworlds. But as a bit of interest regarding its spread, the Puma would be the first clan omnimech to be manufactured on Donegal, and it would find a home being manufactured on Ark Royal at Site 3 as well. Its popularity with Innersphere pilots would be obvious given its incredible traits. In all of its forms, it hits twice as hard as the best inner sphere light mechs, and was protected as well as most mediums, while still moving with the grace of a light-medium mech. This would cause the Adder to find a home across the inner sphere wherever pilots could get their hands on it. Mercenaries and great houses deployed these high-powered monstrosities to great effect, including against its clan originators. But this era of proliferation would not last. The Blakest era destroyed much of the inner sphere, and the Wars of Reaving severed any trade or reinforcements between the Kerensky cluster and the homes of mankind. Its adoption would go down throughout the era of the Dark Age, though notably spheroid entities did still employ them where available. Mercenaries and the doomed Republic of the Sphere were the most notable users of this war machine. With time, however, the Federated Sons and the Lyran Commonwealth would manage to get their hands on this mighty mech once more as the Dark Age progressed. Beyond this, they reliably remained in the inventories of almost every clan power that remains inside of the invasion corridor and beyond. Now, over 140 years old, the Adder is still one of the most dangerous and powerful light mech platforms ever built. While it may need to compete with mechs supporting new, advanced armor types, or technologies, like stealth armor, advanced ballistic reactive armor, or TS-EMP, and an assortment of other dangerous and deadly weapons, none of its original configurations have become obsolete, even with the passage of over a century. When the Adder shows up on the field, it is still one of the most dangerous snakes in the grass to stumble across. With raw firepower, speed, and armor, it will degrade its opposition one blast at a time, before slithering in for the kill. Lights, mediums, or heavies will become its victims, if it is piloted by a skilled Mechwarrior and given direction by a dangerously minded commander. Those who don't give this devil its due will quickly become its next meal, especially when facing something like the Prime, with its twin clan ERPPCs, acting as venom-filled fangs to plunge into its enemies. Perhaps one of the deadliest light mechs ever constructed, the 35-ton omnimech known as the Adder by the clans, or the Puma when it first arrived in the inner sphere, proves that the ultimate mech is achievable, if you set your expectations correctly. A near-perfect balance of the armor triangle, i.e. firepower, speed, and mobility, it has few shortcomings, and even those can be forgiven. To prove this, when factoring in its tonnage, it has some of the best ratio of weaponry and equipment of any light mech. This is displayed easily with its 16 tons of onboard pod space to use in its various configurations. To give perspective, that is 45% of its entire weight being dedicated to this function. This tonnage means that the Puma can install a wide array of weapon systems for its size, or it can invest substantially into heavier guns. As you've probably deduced by now, the Adder is mostly known for doing the latter. For its core components, it has a standard gyro and cockpit, and utilizes clan endo steel. Its specialized frame drops the weight of its internal structure from 3.5 to 2 tons. This does take up several of the mech's critical slot potential on board, but this doesn't have a massive impact on light mechs because they can't possibly hope to fill the volume of space on board regardless, even with its enhanced tonnage for equipment. When it comes to cooling, the Adder just uses its base total of 10 heatsinks, which are enhanced by being clan double heatsinks. Because it's an omnimech, per configuration as needed, it can install modular double heatsinks on board when required. Though famously, this snake-based mech can ironically run quite hot. Managing its thermals is a key point to victory for this dynamite light mech. Now, to look at its onboard electronics, the Puma installs a Trueborn Ultra 945B communications package, as well as an Adder Special V8.6 targeting and tracking system. Neither of these Clantech electronic systems give the Puma any additional bonuses in-game, however. As far as quirks or unique traits are concerned, the Adder only has one, and it is a spectacular bonus, I should add, though it is only for when these are enabled in the advanced rules. It has the narrow or low profile quirk, meaning it is much more likely to only receive a glancing blow from incoming fire. This is one of the most powerful traits in the game, and makes the Adder much harder to remove from combat, even by powerful, heavily gunned opponents. Typically, heavily gunned machines have to sacrifice somewhere, and often this is in the realm of speed and maneuverability. The Adder, however, does not do this. During the Succession Wars, the average speed of most light mechs, barring the fastest recon units, like the Locust for example, would move 97 kilometers per hour, and through the use of advanced clan technologies, the Puma does just this, despite being more heavily armed than Inner Sphere heavies. Powered by a 4.5-ton Great Father 210 extra light fusion engine, the Puma can indeed achieve a maximum speed of 97 kilometers per hour, or 9 movement points in the tabletop game. While it doesn't jump save for in one official configuration, as jump jets can be installed through omnipods, this level of mobility is more than satisfactory for the kind of heavy ordnance it can bring to the battlefield. It is fast enough to keep up with most Inner Sphere mechs of the same weight class, and can rip through them in only 1 to 2 rounds of fire. It's graceful enough to escape battlemechs that are heavier and may put pressure on it or attempt to knock it out, allowing it to continuously harass targets over and over again until it achieves victory over its lumbering enemies. In essence, it can move quickly enough to be hard to hit, or can reposition with ease, allowing it to keep fighting the battle on its own terms, against most enemies. Anything it cannot outrun, it can outgun. Anything it cannot outgun, it can outrun. Another realm of combat that the Puma doesn't sacrifice in is in the District of Defense. Normally, light mechs will struggle to invest weight into their armor, and anything that is invested is usually not able to provide big returns. With a combination of installing an appropriate amount of tonnage for its weight, and equipping clan tech plating, this 35-ton beast is competitive with most Inner Sphere medium mechs when it comes to physical protection and survivability. The Adder possesses 6 tons of Starlight Clan ferrofibrous plating, giving it an armor point value of 115. This means it's actually difficult to remove, even if it is caught while using its speed to avoid engagements, by simply putting 1 turn of fire into it. Even clan heavy mechs may lack the raw power to simply put this little devil down in a single volley. Between pod space, movement, and defense, the Puma is definitely one of Clan Star Adder's greatest achievements. It is a true war winner, especially if it had been used as the Adders had envisioned. Simplicity really does work. This is something I've mentioned many times, and I will reiterate it here once again. The Adder Prime is extremely straightforward in its design. First, to go over its equipment, it has an additional double heatsink, in an attempt to keep the mech in a condition of not boiling the pilot entirely after an alpha strike. More importantly, next, it has a targeting computer, improving the mech's gunnery and allowing it more flexibility when making called shots, with devastating results. It's interesting because the rest of the Puma is simply 2 arm-mounted Clan ER PPCs. Each of these weapons hit, with the force and range of a Gauss rifle. A single strike can potentially knock out any mech in the game almost, if it were a lucky headshot. If not, these weapons will batter and erode their targets until they rip through any outer defenses they have, before blasting off limbs, side torsos, or even burning straight through the center of mass of its victim. When using these in concert with its mobility, firing as needed and overheating as needed, it makes the Adder truly the most dangerous snake most Mechwarriors will ever come across. Now, to be clear, the Puma does overheat when firing both cannons, and significantly so. This is why firing both cannons at once must be reserved for maximum effect. One of the weaknesses the Puma possesses is that if it does fire both of these guns, it will slow down, significantly so even, and this will allow other, heavier mechs to potentially give a significant and devastating reprisal for its actions. The Prime is a delicate death dealer in this sense. For the most part, it should only fire one cannon, and then wait for the opportunity, the right moment to strike, before delivering a series of crippling or killing blows to its adversary. What if I told you you could have an archer for only 35 tons, and it would move dramatically more quickly? Would you laugh at me? Would you mock me? Would you tell me my dreams were false, and that I should be ashamed of myself? Well, you would be wrong to do all of those things, and it would also hurt my feelings. But this isn't about me. This is about the devastating capabilities of the little 35-tonner that could. Because the Adder Configuration A exists, and it is truly a nightmare combination of lighter clan tech weaponry and its other virtues. It's genuinely shocking, but it is armed and equipped with a very similar payload to the Archer. This clan invasion era configuration would have been a horrifying shock for any Inner Sphere pilot to have the misfortune to have come across. First, it has a pair of arm-mounted LRM-20s. Yes, full launchers, and each has 2 tons of ammunition, giving it 12 rounds of fire per launcher. This is a devastating level of damage output that can be launched into enemy mechs and vehicles. Better yet, the Adder can use these as indirect fire weapons. The long range of LRMs make them all the better, and unlike Inner Sphere LRM-20s, they can be used at point-blank range without any penalties as well. To enhance its brutal barrage, as its final backup, it has a pair of side torso-mounted small pulse lasers, which can add extra strikes in close, or can be used to cut through infantry assets. Overall, the A configuration of the Puma is an exceptional piece of technology, and it outperforms almost every one of the Inner Sphere's missile boats. If not in the raw number of missiles, then in its virtue of maneuvering. Because if the A configuration wants to avoid reprisals, it can realistically be used in such a way to avoid enemies almost altogether due to its high level of mobility. Even light mechs that might catch it may find themselves having caught only dozens of LRM missiles, shredding through their limited armor plating and ending their time on the battlefield. It is very uncommon to find a heavy laser build which works, if I'm being honest. While their weight and damage are impressive, often their range, high heat, and lack of accuracy makes them questionable choices for most mechs built around them. The H configuration, however, is most certainly not as limited in this respect. In essence, this configuration of the Adder is one of the best examples of the heavy large laser being used to its fullest potential. Introduced in the dying days of the clan invasion era, during the apocalypse of what Clan Smoke Jaguar was facing in 3059, the H very much reflects the Prime in several respects. First, it has a targeting computer, which is extremely important as it eliminates the accuracy penalty for using these weapons. Second, it only has 2 weapon systems, though instead of it being particle projection cannons, it now uses heavy large lasers. These hit with a slightly higher level of damage than Clantech PPCs, but way less. Functionally, they are Inner Sphere large lasers that do twice as much damage as their originators, while only going the traditional 15 hexes in-game. Where things get interesting is that while yes, this mech doesn't shoot as far as the Prime, it is significantly cooler running. With all of the saved tonnage from downgrading the PPCs, this is put into additional double heat sinks, bringing its cooling to an impressive 32, which is enough to, if it doesn't move, be close to neutral while firing its devastating pair of lasers, though it will need to weapon cycle in order to avoid major repercussions. But all things come at a cost. That's how life is. Because of their shorter range, The H is more likely to have to close with its enemies to receive favorable firing conditions, meaning it itself is at greater risk of being attacked, or facing a riposte in response to its strikes. So the H is a comparatively cool running killer, where its biggest drawback is that it has to get closer to its enemies in order to be effective. During the Blakest era, the Hag would arrive and change the face of Battletech, and as a mech with such a large volume of pod space for its size, it should be obvious to all to know. But yes, the Adder would have a variant which embraces the Hag revolution. The J configuration is very simple. It has a right arm mounted Hag 20, which is a reasonably powerful version of this weapon, and it has 18 rounds of ammunition for it. In its left arm, to deal with infantry and battle armor, it has 4 anti-personnel Gauss rifles with 40 rounds between the 4 of them. Overall, despite the impressive Hag weapon system, genuinely, the J does seem very limited in terms of its overall offensive power. It is as if, when the Hag arrived, every mech needed some version which possessed them, but it just doesn't have the tonnage to properly support a larger version of the system. Yes, it is still dangerous, but it is not nearly as lethal as many of its stablemates. The new generation of Adder configurations seen in the Ilclan recognition guides are often quite different from those found in Technical Readout 3050, or the Clan Invasion Technical Readout. One of the more prominent examples of this, and one which is a radical change for the Adder in multiple ways, is the L configuration, which was first introduced in 3147, in the final, sad years of the Republic of the Sphere. This model goes on to add a series of less than common upgrades for the Puma. To start with, it has an ECM suite on board, helping provide the mech with an invisible layer of protection. More importantly, its mobility is wildly improved by installing 6 jump jets on board, allowing it to leap up to 180 meters, which is more than impressive. This creates new possibilities for the Adders in multiple ways. It can ambush targets more easily. It can operate in denser environments with more effectiveness. It can both defend itself more adequately and strike with more aggression. And this doesn't even touch everything. Mobility is vital in this world of armored combat, and the addition of jump jets to this pocket heavy mech is most certainly a dangerous combination, albeit at the expense of some of its striking power. So where do things go from here? It installs 4 Streak LRM-5 launchers, with 2 in each arm and 48 rounds of fire between the 4 systems. These make sure it's not wasting ammunition, and gives the mech multiple chances to land strikes on targets. It keeps it in the field longer, and makes sure that the shots count, but at the expense of not being able to indirect fire. Then, it has 2 side torso mounted ER medium lasers to back these up, for if the fighting gets close, or if it needs additional fire to bring down its enemies. While this mech is much more impressive due to its mobility, its firepower is less concentrated, or less severe, than some of its more traditional variants. All the same, it should not be underestimated. The T configuration of most battlemechs are truly updates of their prime configurations, but for a new time, that of the Dark Age and the Ilclan era. Introduced in 3142, this Puma variant is a devastating update of the original, albeit as a side grade, in its own way. It mirrors the original in having 2 clan ERPPCs, but unlike the original, it does not have a targeting computer. Instead, the T makes 2 vital changes. First, it installs a coolant pod in order to help mitigate the disaster situation where it may need to alpha strike. Second, it installs capacitors to its ERPPCs. Capacitors, as stated in other videos, take weapons like an ERPPC to another level. It increases the heat by 5 and the damage by 5, but it can't be done every turn. This means it makes the PPC hit with the full force of an AC-20, which is absolutely devastating. Ideally, the Adder T should just fire one of its cannons every turn, alternating between the 2. Each hit can cause a piloting skill roll on its opponent, and when hitting lighter mechs, may immediately destroy them even. In the case of an Alpha Strike, it can hit its coolant pod, fire both guns, and still overheat to be clear. But not so much that it's crippled for doing it, at least right away. It's an interesting take on the original Prime, with both benefits and disadvantages. It does more damage, but at the cost of being less accurate. Either one is a valid way to dispatch the enemies of the clans. When one thinks of a terrifying sight to see on the battlefield, more specifically from the clans, perhaps their minds will drift to the famous Timberwolf, looming with its missiles and lasers in the distance. Perhaps they may imagine the fearsome Mad Dog, or the monstrous Stone Rhino, or the infamous Direwolf. There are also an assortment of other heavy horrors that can emerge from clan dropships or bases. But the truth is these machines are, depending on the era, quite uncommon, or even overrated by latter eras, where they will have to fight more competitive adversaries. But there is one true terror of the Inner Sphere that hasn't lost its edge, and that is the Adder. Many commanders will underestimate it, or not recognize it as the threat that it is at first glance. But Clan Star Adder's wrathful machine has visited a curse upon the Inner Sphere, well past when it envisioned its own invasion. It is a lethal poison, a venom, against any mech force. When overlooked in particular is when whole lances, or even companies, may be put in jeopardy by its presence. Size and power are not always the indicators of lethality. Sometimes those on the smaller end of these spectrums are the true monsters to watch out for. The Adder does not even fall into the ranks of a medium mech by weight, but it can potentially trade blows with some of its heavier clan counterparts. It is perhaps the best example of a clan light mech in the entirety of this setting. Thank you for joining me here today. I hope you all enjoyed this exploration of the little snake that could. If you did, don't forget to hit the like button. It does help out a lot, I do promise. Also, if you are new here, why not subscribe? I do my best to provide updates as often as possible, and you'll be happy with the content, I think. Also, a huge thank you to all the channel members who support this channel. I couldn't do this without you guys, so you know I mean it when I say this. This content is made only possible because of viewers like you. And with that, I look forward to seeing all of you in the comments section below.